Ever since I played Tamriel Rebuilt's latest releases that focus on Hlaalu territory, I've become more interested in the lore and the culture of this great house. And because of Tamriel Rebuilt, we now have a chance of exploring some of the best and biggest cities ever designed for any Elder Scrolls game, places like Foyen and Narsis. And I think that there are some interesting world-building ideas to be analyzed there. Specifically, I'd like to focus on House Hlaalu architecture and examples of regional adaptations, as well as how this architecture reflects the Hlaalu character. From the well-known towns of Balmora and Suran to the more complex and sprawling cities of the mainland, as well as the charming little caravan outposts, secluded manors, and fortified plantations. Hlaalu structures are generally blocky and pragmatic, with a simple, almost modular design based on stacked, rectangular shapes, making them highly adaptive. So it'd be interesting to see how Hlaalu cities develop under different conditions. We will begin our journey with the northernmost settlement, Balmora, and then trace the path south all the way to Narsis, analyzing the different styles and changes that House Hlaalu adopted throughout the centuries. And before we move on, a few words about the mods I use in this video. I use Beautiful Cities of Morrowind to overhaul vanilla towns. It's a very subtle and lore-friendly way of enhancing settlements while preserving their original vision. Also, in cases like that of White Suran, I will use it to showcase ways that Hlaalu style can be diversified to achieve more unique variations by simply altering the texture color. So with that said, my name is Alec and thank you for watching.
Let's do some business, shall we?
What makes this smell?
Where else to begin than in Balmora, the district seat of House Hlaalu on Wardenfell. Balmora is easily one of the most memorable and beloved Elder Scrolls towns. In many ways, it's an ideal city, almost perfectly designed with districts that reflect social hierarchy, like the Labor Town and Manor District. It has properly lined streets and a genuine lived-in, grounded realism. I remember spending hours upon my first visit, just exploring the exteriors, browsing crates, and hiding from rain under the covered entrance of the Fighters Guild. I believe that Bethesda really nailed the scale here. In-game, Balmora doesn't feel too small nor too big, while at the same time it's so easy to imagine its supposed true size. Blocky Hlaalu architecture, unlike the more organic and raw forms of Redoran and Telvanni, is simply ideal for designing dense, urban areas of narrow, crowded streets and passageways, expanding in a grid-like layout like an endless stone forest. Its practicality and accessibility reflect the pragmatic, modern approach of the Hlaalu. So first, let's cover the basic Hlaalu structure. A typical Hlaalu house features a squarish or rectangular design with rounded buttresses for additional support. Primary building material seems to be the mud brick with stucco-covered walls, providing a smooth yellow-colored exterior. Structures often come with exterior stairways, connecting ground level with the upper floors, balconies, and flat rooftops. Again, it's a very practical, minimalistic design, well suited for growth and expansion. It also reflects House Hlaalu's break from the Velothi tradition and embrace of Western imperial values. Interesting thing is the apparent lack of windows. Some buildings are completely devoid of them, while others have these rather narrow vertical windows built out of some thick green material. Dunmer and even Hlaalu seem to be allergic to common glass, unless it's the highly expensive and rare volcanic glass. Now, I doubt that windows were built out of this highly valuable material, although I wouldn't be surprised if some exceptionally wealthy Hlaalu aristocrat used volcanic glass for decorating their manor. These windows are most likely ornamental, as they provide a minimal amount of light. A general lack of windows makes perfect sense, as Wardenfell's landscape is dominated by a large, active volcano, and the atmosphere is thick, filled with ash and who knows what else. Unlike the Redoran, who mostly dwell underground, Hlaalu live above the ground. Thus, they need maximum protection against the blight and constant ash storms. As a result, Hlaalu interiors are extremely dark, and require a good amount of artificial light, like candles, oil lamps, and lanterns, for functional living. Although, who knows, maybe the reserved Dunmer appreciate darker, more private interiors suitable for self-reflection. Speaking of real-life influences and inspirations, Hlaalu's style is very much inspired by Middle Eastern, specifically Mesopotamian and Old Persian architecture. Hlaalu guard towers, for example, resemble wind catchers of ancient Persia. Another possible influence comes from the Pueblo with its massive blocky structures, flat rooftops, and wooden beams extending through the exterior wall surface. Larger buildings like manors or council halls are obviously more stylized and usually have two separate front doors. I always found this detail intriguing for some reason, although I think this is mostly for aesthetic and perhaps even symbolic purposes. With the Hlaalu being all about commerce, double doors could symbolize the flow or exchange of goods and wealth. Balmora is conveniently surrounded by hills, and city blends in almost perfectly with a rocky, half-barren landscape, giving it a serene, almost sleepy atmosphere, despite the raw, industrial aesthetic. There's a really elegant flow of energy between the districts, no doubt thanks to the modest, simple architecture. And due to the natural enclosure, Balmora provides a sense of safety, with roads leading both north and south towards relatively safe, peaceful small towns of Pelagiad and Caldera. Balmora is, in fact, one of the older settlements on Wardenfell, although it rapidly expanded only in recent times, during the rule of Duke Vedam Dren and the rise of House Hlaalu through its alliance with the Empire. It's definitely a commercial center of Wardenfell, which is why it's strange that it lacks a proper docking area. I'm almost certain that the Odai River, which flows through the city, was supposed to be much larger and navigable. It would make a lot of sense considering Balmora's strategic location. However, in-game rivers, small size and low bridges would render any meaningful ship transportation impossible. Our next destination, the seedy town of Suran, lore-wise has a port, although it's also absent from the game. Suran is a market town perched on the Lake Masobi's eastern shore. It's also described as an agricultural village, gateway to Ascadian Isles, and a busy port. Architecture-wise, it's a typical Hlaalu settlement, smaller than Balmora but nevertheless an important regional center. Suran is a more rustic interpretation of Hlaalu ideals. Surrounded by peaceful pastoral elements of the Ascadian Isles, its typical market town architecture and urban planning represent a more, let's say, honest side of Hlaalu's commercial enterprise. And it's here where we will find the first example of a unique Hlaalu variation. White Suran is one of my must-have mods. And it also comes as an option with the beautiful cities of Morrowind. I think that the slightly white coloration provides Suran with a welcoming pseudo-Mediterranean aesthetic, intensifying its warm, rustic element. Even though we said that Hlaalu style adapts well to a number of different environments, I believe that it's at its best within the green, fertile gardens of southern Wardenfell. It's definitely more playful and elegant here, hiding its decadent, strictly pragmatic aura through the synthesis with the liberating green scenery and ever-blue skies. The arched entryways and serpentine walls almost seem like a natural extension of the surrounding landscape, offering tranquility and a warm embrace. To me, Suran is a deeply mystical and enchanting village, ornamented with many unsuspecting quiet corners and liminal spaces. There's a seemingly abandoned humble temple and a silent governor's villa overlooking the village below, drenched in a perpetual hum of the glistening waves. For a supposedly busy, loud place, it truly feels incredibly quiet, especially in the upper levels, away from the main town square. The liminal nature of Suran is also marked in its role as a sleepy holiday destination and its proximity to the deadly Daedric ruins and the hellish region of Molag Amur, just beyond those barren, threatening mountains. I always enjoyed finding these pockets of obscurity in Suran's upper level, overlooking the most magnificent sunsets in all of Morrowind. The town's almost unnaturally quiet and static streets and squares, often eerily empty and overwhelmed by long, dramatic shadows, are indeed like the Kiriko's paintings. At moments, a supposedly bustling, vibrant town feels like a staged scene, a theater of dreams caught in a moment of perpetual dusk, under some distant drunken star. Ultimately, I think that Suran's very design is its main narrative. It's a story of transition from the lower markets to the silent and closed gardens, from the never-ending cycle of gossip, trade, and humdrum of life, to the elevated stillness and tranquility found in its enclosed gardens above the crowded square. Suran enjoys such aesthetic harmony, and is, in my opinion, the best example of a playfully elegant yet honest Hlaalu architectural style that, sadly, didn't have a chance to grow and further develop. Dren Plantation is the biggest and richest plantation in all of Varnafell. These Hlaalu plantations scattered across the Ascadian Isles were always interesting to me, as they basically function as self-sustained feudal settlements, with their own guards, labor, and aristocracy. They are like micro-worlds representing the Hlaalu archetype in its totality. Each plantation is centered around its grand manor, in this case, Dren's villa, which unsurprisingly dominates the walled compound with its sheer size and shameless display of wealth. For me, it's the remoteness and isolation of these fortified estates that make them so intriguing. They invite exploration and discretion while also playing a big role in Morrowind's environmental storytelling. It's so easy to imagine caravans and merchants traveling back and forth between Suran and the plantation, transferring both slaves and goods. The commerce here is an ongoing, never-ending rite, a highly ritualized process. Thus, even the ground seems sacred in some twisted, unholy way, as if we are not even supposed to step into this place. But there's also a pure raw aesthetic beauty of Hlaalu plantations, the aesthetic of a walled, sacred, and forbidden garden. We will see later on the mainland even more advanced, mature realizations of this form. So now let's hop across the inner sea and explore some of the Hlaalu settlements on the mainland. The great port city of Foyen, up until the release of Narsis, was the single largest Hlaalu city. And dare I say, it was the only one that felt like a true city, making Balmora in comparison look like a small provincial town. Obviously, we are now on the mainland. We are expected to find larger, more complex, and established cities, not limited or affected by Varnafell's hostile terrain, climate, and a smaller population. The city's most defining architectural feature is its layered composition and vertical expansion. Through the network of stairs and bridges, the city's different levels are tied together in a sophisticated and at the same time functional way. It feels both spacious and intimate, and to me this is one of the more charming aspects of Foyen. There's a maze-like quality to it, although it feels natural and inviting, in a sense that you feel invited to explore the streets and hidden passages. And again, to me this means that the city possesses a character, a soul if you will. Foyen is situated on the western side of the Tyr River Delta and enjoys a great deal of independence even from the Septim Empire. In other words, Foyen is the pure, unrestricted manifestation of Hlaalu ideals and a vision of its vibrant future. But it also comes with its rich and dramatic history. The city is built on the site of a great victory over the invading Akaviri forces in the Second Era. Specifically, this is where the goddess Almalexia induced a cataclysm that destroyed much of that army. Temple Isle lies at the center, next to the shrine dedicated to Almalexia, and the rest of the city is then built around it, expanding and embracing the rugged terrain. So technically Foyen is built over a large crater, and is a monument dedicated to the triumph of Dunmer over the enemy. A large Dwemer ruin, whose name I dare not pronounce, is situated nearby and is home to some of the less fortunate residents. It's practically a part of the city, adding to Foyen's already impressive scale and complexity. Naturally, such a vast city is divided into several districts. Warden Plaza, in the eastern part, is where the majority of non-Dunmer reside and is also home to imperial guilds and numerous shops, as well as the Great Hlaalu Council Hall. I especially love the town square with a large tree in the center. A small detail, perhaps, but the tree makes this part of the city less industrial and more like a genuine home. Overall, I think that Foyen would greatly benefit from having a park, although the lack of natural space could prove problematic. There's a tiny green area just behind the temple that could, with some careful planning, be turned into a lovely park or garden. Speaking of trees, one of my first impressions upon entering the city through the eastern gate was of these beautiful curvy palm trees stretching towards the sky between massive towers and manors of the old town. It adds so much exoticness and mystique. Thanks to local flora, there's a warm, even tropical aesthetic to Foyen. Old Town is a densely populated area attached to the western cliffs. And this is where most Dunmer, both rich and poor, live and work. The way of life here hasn't changed much for thousands of years. And if you find yourself here, you could feel this all-embracing moment of perfect stillness. The eternal late afternoon. And in this perfect moment are condensed both the sacred, proud past, with all of its glories and victories over the foreign demons, and hopes and dreams of the new golden age, the age of Hlaalu. I spoke earlier about the Kiriko's metaphysical paintings, and how some aspects of Morrowind remind me of them. To that point, Foyen's melancholic urban landscape, the strange interplay of light and shadow, eerie abandoned streets, dramatic angles, but above all, the perfect dreamlike emptiness, all point towards this abstract metaphysical dimension. You see, it's not that Foyen lacks population, it is home to hundreds of unique characters. However, they are not found standing on the streets like mannequins, waiting for the player. Foyen lives or exists outside of the player's bubble, caught in this perfect moment. It has its own rhythm, just like a real city. And beneath this hazy metaphysical painting, there's a real world with real stories and secrets, awaiting to be discovered, step by step through questing and exploration. Although we said that Foyen operates freely from the all-seeing eye of the Septim Empire, truth is that city itself is slowly morphing into a new, westernized form. This is best shown in the Manor District, where rich foreigners inhabit grand manors built in a new, syncretic style of the promised Golden Age, combining Hlaalu and Imperial architecture. In all honesty, it's one of my favorite architectural styles in Morrowind. It's luxurious, elegant, and combines the best of both worlds. The Imperial Commission, huge residence of the Imperial Magistrate, is built in this style, but possibly the most interesting example of the new syncretic style is the Chapel of Mara, a round temple-like structure with a large dome and recognizable Imperial windows, clothed in the typical Hlaalu uniform. Above the Almalexia's shrine, overlooking the entire city, lies a grand Andus estate, a fortress-like, robust, defensive structure. All the classic elements of Hlaalu style are present and elevated to a whole new level of splendor. And there's also something very brutalist about it, which just sparks my imagination because I'd love to see more of this mixed, brutalist Hlaalu style. However, if I had to choose a personal favorite Hlaalu fortress, that would be Oran Manor, found deep within the sun-drenched, idyllic Antarin. Oran Plantation is the greatest Hlaalu plantation in the region, home to incredibly wealthy Atran Oran, council elector of the Hlaalu Council. The plantation produces large amounts of cranberry and heklo and is the center of a vast network of satellite farmhouses and lookout towers, dotting the entire fertile region. The central high tower is a prominent landmark signifying Hlaalu control over the western bank of the river Tyr. In fact, we could say that watchtowers are Hlaalu's specialty, a way of marking their territory. Atran Oran himself started as a mere pit fighter in Narsis, slowly rising in ranks and building a name for himself. From such a humble background, Atran became one of the wealthiest business owners in Morrowind. And perhaps it's not a coincidence that it was him who carved a piece of Hlaalu kingdom in the middle of the politically divided Antirene region. As we're gonna see later, Hlaalu origins lie in Morrowind's red and dusty southern deserts, near the source of the very important Tyr River. Hlaalu expansion along the river, spreading and coiling around it like a snake, is not a coincidence. Like most Hlaalu plantations, Oran Estate is a neatly ordered, well-protected walled compound, comprised of the central manor and numerous surrounding structures, like slave shacks, storages, barracks, and guard towers. On my first visit from a distance, Oran Plantation seemed like a genuine settlement, perhaps a small town. And I do wonder, if given enough time, would this plantation develop into a full-blown town due to the sheer wealth and power of the Oran Tower? Stylistically, the tower itself seems to borrow some of the Western imperial elements, as it slightly deviates from the standard angular Hlaalu design. This presentation would be incomplete without talking about Arvud, a small caravan outpost situated in the middle of a vast hostile region of Armun Ashlands. It's in fact one of my favorite small, so-called inconsequential towns. Towns that simply exist on their own, and the player has little reason to visit them, yet they bring so much depth and life to the overall world. Arvud is perhaps the best example of a more exotic, alien, or simply strange use of Hlaalu architecture. And it's basically proof that even the so-called generic, practical architecture of House Hlaalu can match the weird aesthetics of other great houses. Entire place feels like it belongs to the Dune universe, or some similar strange sci-fi world. Arvud is built over the ancient Redren ruins and represents a single oasis of civilization in one of the most inhospitable regions of Morrowind. Thick defensive walls protect the clustered buildings from outside danger, providing Arvud with some sense of safety. Streets, if we can call them that, are extremely narrow as they twist through Arvud's dense, labyrinthine layout. Everything seems so packed and almost claustrophobic. There's no anonymity here, no private space. Just one tight microcosm of interconnected life on the frontier. I believe that my fascination with Arvud stems from its unique hermetic nature. The created microcosm of a cramped urban space, shielded against the vast desert of death. There's an unparalleled lived-in, gritty atmosphere and a sense of isolation rarely seen elsewhere in Morrowind. And then there's Narsis, the capital of Great House Hlaalu, its largest city and, in fact, the second largest city in all of Morrowind. Occupying the deep south, Narsis is built on a large mesa and is encircled by the Tyr River. This is in many ways the heart of Morrowind. Ancient, alien, dangerous landscape, yet not without its raw, primordial beauty. The source of the mighty and holy river Tyr lies near the city, blessing the red desert of Shipal Shin with its life-giving currents. There's an all-pervading enchantment to this landscape, as if the time itself distorts in manifold patterns. Narsis is, in many ways, the beginning and the end, a cycle. You see, it's difficult to approach Narsis from a single overarching angle. Sure, it's an established metropolis, a sprawling, dense urban space, crowned with the most opulent manors, grand bazaars, palaces, and high towers, all reaching the most complex, mature point of Hlaalu's architectural style. Yet, as I kept examining Narsis from within, from the shadows of its sun-baked towers, my subjective interpretation kept changing as I gained more and more insight into its hidden nature. In other words, yes, everything we've seen so far, all the stylistic creative choices regarding Hlaalu architecture are elevated here to the highest degree. However, Narsis isn't just Balmora or even Foyen on steroids. It isn't just more of the same for the sake of pure quantity. Just as we said that Foyen had its character, or soul, completely different from that of Balmora, so is Narsis imbued with its own character, a character comprised of many subtle metapoetic layers. Although I generally avoid talking about real-life inspirations behind the world of Elder Scrolls, as I prefer taking it as it is, a unique, self-contained fantasy world standing on its own, I couldn't help but compare Narsis with the Renaissance-era North Italian city-states and their predominant mercantilism and accent on communal living. Now, in that sense, Elder Scrolls is extremely anachronistic, as its world-building structurally ranges, roughly speaking, from prehistoric Bronze Age primordialism all the way to the, I'd say, late Renaissance, at times even flirting with the Victorian steampunkish sci-fi elements. And Narsis, as an archetype, reflects this chronological diversity in its totality. On a basic level, it's a Sumerian city that evolved through centuries, or millennia, while keeping its fundamental architectural style. There's also a touch of Byzantine political complexity, ruthless bureaucracy, and administration veiled in gold and purple, combined with a lavish ceremonialism present in everyday life. On the streets, between the busy market stalls and on open squares, the only thing that matters is the commerce, the never-ending flow of wealth, the sacred craft of mercantilism. Narsis is the prototype, the ancestral Hlaalu city. So, while we could say that in-game Narsis is a reinterpretation of the traditional modular architectural style, the truth is that all other variations that we have seen so far, tracing our way back to Balmora, are only simplified subsequent forms of the original, born right here, among the red, dusty canyons. Take, for example, the oldest continuously inhabited building in the city, the first Hlaalu family manor. The architecture is clearly built upon the circular high Velothi style, and we could only imagine that all original Hlaalu structures followed this or a similar design, gradually advancing towards a more modern, simplistic, straight-angled style. The city's complex layout evokes the sense of a dense, fortified urban fabric. The winding streets, interwoven bridges, and a dramatic verticality create surprisingly a rather intimate ecosystem, where the city seems to grow organically from the landscape. I'm also intrigued with the evolving play of light and shadow throughout the day, where the architecture itself becomes a canvas for the changing light, giving the spaces a sense of depth and movement. It's quite similar to Suran's dreamlike cycladic imagery, only brought up to a new dimension. And speaking of Suran and the use of white color, I also use a mod specifically dedicated to Narsis and all surrounding Hlaalu structures. A mod simply called Orange Narsis reimagines the city with a subtle orange tint instead of a standard yellow. A small change, however, it provides Narsis with more depth and warm saturation, and I think that it fits it perfectly. The entire region is bathed in a warm light, with reds, oranges, and yellows dominating the color scheme. There's a thick, hazy quality to it and an atmosphere of oppressive heat of the surrounding desert, threatening to engulf the city. It's as if Narsis is caught in a perpetual hot, melancholic summer day. It's quite telling that Narsis, the very heart of House Hlaalu, hasn't just imported imperial style, but fused it with their own, establishing, in my opinion, a rather fascinating syncretic style, or even a vision that speaks to the people caught between their ancient heritage and the seductive, pragmatic modernity. These new impressive structures crowning the highest plateau of Narsis add a sense of an elegant, Romanesque order and symmetry, and among them, statues depicting Dunmer figures. It's like witnessing the birth of a new culture, set for conquering the barbaric, primitive world through the sheer power of order and arrogance, yet destined to be short-lived. Narsis and its surrounding region also have a sense of weird, elven, southern Gothic fantasy. Must be the colossal red canyons rising up to the clouds and the burning deserts of Shipal Shin that clearly evoke American Southwest imagery. Which actually makes even more sense because, as we said in the beginning, Hlaalu style definitely draws inspiration, at least partially, from the Pueblo architecture. I think that the overall theme of a decadent aristocracy, decaying wealth, hidden or maybe not so hidden corruption, the presence of slavery and lavish plantations, as well as a nostalgic, sun-drenched atmosphere, echoes the Southern Gothic aesthetic extremely well, although we will definitely see the most of it in the future release of House Dress. Earlier we said that Narsis is metaphysically the beginning and the end. This is where Tyr River, the lifeblood of central Morrowind, begins its journey north, and this is where mighty and proud Hlaalu built their capital. However, the prosperous age of Hlaalu began with death and mourning. The very origin of Narsis is closely tied to this cyclical nature of life. Narsis was originally a tomb. Narsis Hlaalu, a founder of first Hlaalu family and, in some way, of Narsis and House Hlaalu, volunteered to guard those who died during the exodus from Somerset under the prophet Velothi. A humble steading was built around the first tomb, and eventually Simple Farm grew into a city. And I think that Narsis always kept this mournful character. Behind all the splendor, Narsis is a well-disguised necropolis, hiding a massive maze of ancient catacombs and tombs within its belly. And going back to the urban planning, I think that Narsis too would greatly benefit from a larger, more defined park area, or perhaps even hanging gardens. I love the small gardens and trees decorating the council quarter, located at the peak of the mesa. So I believe that additional greenery would provide a really nice contrast to the stony, dry metropolis. Measure Hall must be the grandest Hlaalu structure. The building's core is a series of stacked boxy forms, echoing the rational modular approach, and the windows are, again, few and small, prioritizing security and function over light and atmosphere. Dunmer and especially Hlaalu, after all, love their lanterns. And regarding the so-called issue with the windows, which we mentioned at the beginning in the chapter about Balmora, well, Narsis is also located in a very dusty area with prominent dust storms. Thus, again, it makes perfect sense that Hlaalu practically abandoned the use of proper windows. I also believe that these green, thick patches not only flood interiors with diffused soft light, but may also serve as some primitive climate control mechanism, especially in these hot regions.
Seen any elves?
And so does our little tour across the Hlaalu territories, and there are obviously other Hlaalu towns and villages out there that I decided to skip, as I thought that it would be too much for a single video. I tried to cover the most important and most interesting locations. With that said, there was so much more that I could say, but I really had to restrain myself from ranting and digressing too much. I tried to stick to the topic of architecture, but in the end, this was only my highly subjective interpretation. I love discussing the interplay between the landscapes, climate, architecture, bringing up some real-life inspirations, and really just talking about some of my favorite parts of Morrowind. With that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'd love to hear from you. Comments, criticism, or your own interpretations are always welcome. Thank you for your time and support, and I'll see you soon.